Michael Benedikt is an ACSA Distinguished Professor of Architecture at the University of Texas in Austin. He holds the Halbach Chair of Urbanism and teaches design studio and architectural theory. He was the director of the Center for American Architecture and Design and editor of Center, Architectures and Design in America until May 2000. He's a graduate of the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa and of Yale University. Although Professor Benedikt has worked in a medium-sized firm and ran small architectural practices of his own, he's better known for his teaching and writing. He has written many books on deconstructing the Kimball, cyberspace, first tapes, Value and Value 2, and others. The list is long. And his most recent book, where he writes about Buber and architecture, which is the reason we were so happy to have him on board, is Architecture Beyond Experience of 2020. And I can convey that in a previous gathering of all the participants in this session, we had very different opinions, and it was very vivid, and we therefore hope that we'll be able to listen to Michael in a proper way. So it will not be ideal, but it would be comprehensible, I hope.
Good morning, everybody. It's morning for you. It's recording time for me. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in Israel today. Let me start by thanking Alona for inviting me, Paul, Caroline, Regina, my co-speakers. I listen to you online, or I will be listening to you online, and I hope this recorded lecture is not too much of a break in the atmosphere. So I will mostly be reading it to make sure that I complete on time. There are slides with this lecture, not very many, so it'll mostly be me lecturing. So let's see if I can get this started. The title of my talk, Creation, Zion, and the Large and the Small, 3 themes in Buber and Mendelsohn. So let me begin. When a historian of architecture places an architect in his time, he or she, the historian that is, more or less unwittingly places themselves in their time too. Doing what, you may ask? Competing with his or her peers to lay down the tracks along which the past should be understood, and perhaps the future too. This is less true of theorists of architecture. They operate somewhat out of time, or try to. Theorists look for architectural principles at a level of abstraction comparable, say, to that of geometry or physics or biology. These principles, these laws and mechanisms, patterns and computations abound in perceptual effects and social consequences, but they are not themselves the product of history, or of very recent history anyway, say the last 1,000,000 years. They tell rather of the nature of things deeper and larger and older. They are principles that, when discovered, remain true over time, like reality itself. Now, in the teaching of architecture today, history and theory are typically combined. Indeed, they are confounded. To teach one is to teach the other, which is not the case in the sciences. The man who most passionately championed Erich Mendelsohn, more about whom soon, was just such a historian-theorist. His name, as we all know, was Bruno Zevi. So too was his rival Siegfried Giedion, a historian-theorist, and I say theorists because both staked so much of their narrative on the then hot topic in scientific theory, namely Einstein's space-time. Reference to space-time lent an epochal sweep to both men's assertions, a certain universality, a scientific authority. But in truth, they were not very scientific. And today we have the tools, both conceptual and computational, to think about space and time in architecture anew. Now, I'm not going to go into those tools in this short lecture, but let me say that I plan to speak about Erich Mendelsohn's contribution to the history of 20th century architecture with the help of just those ideas, i.e. about space and time. For it might be said that Xavier's efforts to honor Mendelssohn revolved not only around placing Mendelssohn among the great expressionist architectures of the 20th century, but around the hope, the belief that there is or was such a thing as Jewish space, alongside Greek, Roman, Baroque, and modern space, which Xavier identified. Is there such a thing as Jewish space? It will take more than this talk to answer convincingly in the affirmative. I would like to start the first of the three themes in the title of this talk with Mendelssohn's understanding of creation and evolution, which in turn was based on Martin Buber's understanding of creation and evolution, as well as upon both men's deep but non-orthodox and non-reformed Judaism. We know that Mendelssohn attended some of Buber's early lectures on Judaism in Prague and Berlin, and almost certainly read them later. Not evident in the passage I will soon read is Buber's mysticism, based on his studies of Eastern religion as well as Hasidism, to which Mendelssohn was equally attracted. Rather, we will see encouragement of Mendelssohn's renowned independence from, indeed antipathy towards, historical classical architecture. And we will understand the moral ease with which he could adopt the messianic, prophetic stance, at least with respect to architecture, that we find in architects like Le Corbusier, Frank Lloyd Wright, Rudolf Steiner, but, shall I say, Jewishly. Now, here I'm going to read Buber directly from his Lectures on Judaism. When I speak of Jewish renewal, I am well aware that this is a bold, indeed almost daring term, which, being at variance with the current outlook upon life and the world, is unacceptable to it. All activities of the typical man of today are governed by the concept of evolution. That is, the concept of gradual change, or as it is so-called progress, emerging from the collective effort of many small causes. This concept, which, as one begins to realize, can claim only a relative validity in the realm of natural processes, has greatly stimulated and advanced in the natural sciences. But its effect upon the realm of the mind and the will has been highly deleterious. Man's spirit has been as greatly depressed by the sense of inescapable evolution as it had once been depressed by the inescapable predestination induced by Calvinism. The extinction of the heroic, unconditional living in our time must to a great extent be ascribed to this sense. This confidence, now this is Buber continuing, this confidence in the superhuman has been undermined. The power of the spirit was replaced by busyness, and the might of sacrifice by bargaining skill. I am aware that when I speak of renewal, I am leaving the domain of our time and entering that of a new time, a time to come. For by renewal, I do not in any way mean something gradual, the sum total of minor changes. I mean something sudden and immense, by no means a continuation or an improvement, but a return and a transformation. So this is youngish Buber talking to basically Jewish students in the 1920s. Buber did not follow evolutionary theory very closely. Mutations can spread rapidly and be transformative. But he was right, I think, in the narrow sense that creationists are right also. That one cannot feel called by evolution, summoned by evolution, addressed by evolution. Is the still small voice that says to you, forbear, forgive, improve, evolution? Is the voice that bid Abraham go forth, lech lecha, from Haran, evolution? Today some might say yes, very, very indirectly. Buber said no. Buber said God addresses us directly at the time of his choosing, God's choosing. Moreover, God is addressable by us at the time of our choosing, but there is no guarantee of reciprocation on either occasion. God works through tough love, one might say, not chance. Some would characterize beliefs like this as useful fictions, as brain tricks or poetic metaphors, rather than the truth of the matter. The problem is, of course, that this view weakens the benefit of actually believing things directly, unframed. One loses the benefit of prayer, for example, if one believes that when praying one is really talking to oneself. Similarly, one loses the feelings that attend to altruism, and perhaps some of the actual effects of altruism, if one sees, quote unquote, that it is really the altruist's self or kin that benefit. This is not the place to engage philosophically with the nature of faith. I mention it only to identify a possible spiritual cum Jewish source of Mendelssohn's apparent arrogance, of his belief in his own powers, vision, and duties towards the epoch. He had no need of a classical education or Meister. He would make history anew, whether or not that had to do with specifically Jewish renewal. The impetus, according to Buber, addressing a youthful audience, could not be evolution, that massive fidgeting with chance. It could only be creation in emulation of God. In this light, it is no small fact that the sketches that made Mendelssohn famous, more about which soon, were done rapidly in pencil in small notebooks. They came to him in a rush, fairly pouring out of him as a soldier at the front in the First World War. True, the front was quiet when he served, and boredom was probably his chief enemy. But the times were such, and the isolation was such, he was often on guard duty, that his hours took on a religious quality. He could open himself up, he could look into the night. It was a time when God might speak to a young man as he spoke to Jacob in the fields of Luz with angels and ladders. Theme 2, Zion. Others at this symposium will have spoken far more eruditely than I ever could about Kulturpolitik, about the origins of Zionism in Germany, Buber's role in it, and Mendelssohn's life. Certainly Mendelssohn's work in Palestine looks unlike the work he did in Germany. Materials changed, surface treatments simplified, construction techniques became more elemental and less industrialized. He learned from Arabic models, courtyards, wind capture, brick domes, the architecture of mass, shade, and dryness. This was Buber's Zionism of accommodation. But Mendelssohn retained his taste for monumentality, which really means memorableness. Monumentality means memorableness, especially in his large program, hill-occupying projects like Hadassah University Hospital and the Medical Institute of Hebrew University. So, more about this idea of memorableness. The search for meaning, for the meaning of architecture, has sent theorists in several directions over time. For example, it is said that whereas all buildings provide convenience, and shelter, works of architecture give memorable shape to revered human institutions. Or it is held that if architecture is like language, it speaks a high language, a more carefully enunciated, a more consequential language than the vernacular of everyday buildings. Others say buildings are quasi-biological creatures, categorizable into species that embody ways of life adapted to the local climate, materials, and soil. This makes works of architecture, as over mere buildings, like creatures at the top of a food chain, the smartest, most powerful kinds of buildings, insulated from or transcendent of the lowly business of hunting, eating, fishing, fearing, haggling, cleaning. But none of these meaning-giving metaphors, and there are others, override the ancient pre-architectural meaningfulness of the shape of the landscape in the character of its topography. Topography has real physical consequences. Since rainwater flows downhill, taking topsoil with it, valleys are typically more fertile than hilltops, the more so where rainfall is slight. Valleys are also easier to traverse. Hilltops, on the other hand, provide distant views in all directions, which fact, combined with being difficult to climb, gives hilltops a strategic advantage: defensibility. Hilltops are also visible from afar, and so have natural landmark and navigational affordances. And they're just a little closer to the clouds. Where am I going with these not very original observations? To the Hebrew meaning of Zion, Zion, meaning high place. These observations take us to the thousands of hilltops occupied down through the ages as forts, monasteries, signal stations, and temples, including perhaps most famously the Parthenon on the Acropolis of Athens. Why did Mendelssohn's early sketches grab such attention? Now here's actually letters from Mendelssohn, absolutely ecstatic about his visit to the Parthenon. He wrote articles for Berliner Tageblatt, so yeah, you can be sure that it impressed him a great deal. Why did Mendelssohn's early sketches grab such attention? In part, I want to argue, because they pictured large unified buildings viewed from below, resting on a curved earth under the arc of a sky. That arc was sometimes literally drawn, as you see here. Whether or not they were actually to be built on hilltops, they were shown there, like Parthenons against the sky, which is how the real Parthenon is today, and how it appears in the sketchbooks of all young architects who visit. On this score, the ancient Greeks knew what they were doing, to put it mildly, giving a gentle horizon-matching curvature to the temple's bases, called stylobates, and arranging the height of those bases to match the eye level of visitors on the ground nearby, with the effect that the columns, themselves tapered upward and tilted inward at the corners, leap from the horizon to the sky. All these tricks and more are built into Mendelssohn's sketches, including their overall triangular, pediment-like composition, which an earlier slide illustrated. I would say that all Mendelssohn's early buildings were conceived of in this diagonal view from below condition, including one of his last works, the Park Synagogue, which I will go into later. Of course, Jerusalem is a city of hills, of mounts. Most are storied, if not sacred, and many are contested in possession, as we know. I cannot help feel that Mendelssohn's Jewishness was most wrapped up in Zionism at just this level, high placeism, just as non-observant Louis Kahn's was when he drew up the most beautiful building of his, the unbuilt Herva synagogue. Those who would interpret Jewishness as an exalted form of sociality, as communication in I-thou mode between people and God, i.e. Buberian dialogue, will not find that process, I believe, expressed or served or exalted in Mendelssohn. In Mendelssohn's buildings, rooms and room arrangements were all standardly social, standardly functional, the work of a good modern architect. I will suggest that we will find Mendelssohn's Jewishness in his openness to the more ancient Near Eastern image of altars on mountaintops, of places of thunder and revelation turned to places of strength and defensibility. Think Mount Sinai, think Masada. To these images, Mendelssohn added an element almost all his own, a sense of forward motion. Works of architecture designed to be read as entities not unlike large ships, locomotives, even animals. I say an element almost all his own because although Mendelssohn's designs are idiosyncratic, he developed as a designer around the likes of Filippo Marinetti, Antonio Santeglia, and Hugo Haring. Might young Mendelssohn have come to believe in the spark-filled animacy of all things also from Martin Buber, who also had it from Hasidism, or from Henri Bergson and his Élan Vital theory of creative evolution? I don't know. Certainly, Xavi's concept of virtual space builds in this virtual motion, this spatial formal dynamism. And it's no wonder Xavi lauds Mendelssohn as a pioneer. Mendelssohn's curved bay windows see ahead. His long bands of sill-connected windows stream while the whole building seems to lumber or glide. Frank Gehry declared, Erich Mendelssohn's drawings are expressive and beautiful. If he'd had the computers we have now, everything I've done would have been done before me. I would have had to figure out something else. Zaha Hadid might have said the same. But what of Buberian dialogue in Mendelssohn's work? There can be no dialogue, no I-thou encounter between entities unless one entity, and preferably both of them, have hidden depths, character, and an autonomous desire to move and do. Not just being, in other words, but being towards. All of Mendelssohn's early work strive for this quality, a quality which, aside, in my view, from the house for Chaim Weizmann, went missing after he moved to Palestine. There, blockiness took over stasis and place. Inspired by Buber, I propose that Jewishness in architecture might rest in the pursuit of an I-thou relation between people and things and rooms. Such participants in dialogue must be being-filled, mutually regarding, and capable of movement, real or imagined. Viewed in this way, Mendelssohn's work in the Holy Land are not fully Buberianly Jewish. Viewed in this way, they are fine buildings, proud ones, on Zionut. Some might say, Jewish enough. My last theme is called the large and the small. This refers to the strain of scientific religious mysticism that challenges the hierarchy that imagines God surrounding or being identified with the entire cosmos. That imagines God as the biggest entity there is, in charge of the universe as a whole at all scales. Counter to this biblical image, however, is what one might call the holographic view. Here, the whole is seen through the part, as through a lens or window. Or the whole is in the part, or the whole is embedded, or wholeness, and partness are able to be turned inside out, to reverse positions, as it were, topologically in some higher dimension. When William Blake wrote these famous lines, "To see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wild flower is to hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour," we feel that strange mixture of everyday truth with holiness. Our rabbis, citing Hillel, tell us that, quote, "when a person dies, an entire universe is extinguished," and with that claim convey an uncanny truth, one that fuses what is small with what is large, what is local with what is universal, below with above. In the sciences, astrophysicists and quantum physicists acknowledge as much with the discovery of non-locality, that every particle has an inverse twin, or rather another half, another side, to which, whether it is nearby or in a galaxy far away, it is instantaneously and forever linked. Now, Buber's concept of I-thou depends also on this topological large in small inversion. The lines of all I-you encounters between people, he said, converge. They not only converge upon, but radiate from the eternal thou, which or who is God. With this metaphor, Buber partially saves the biblical God, a son, a single source of what turns us to goodness by turning us towards him, with a capital H. In I and thou, he also invokes the more familiar image of eyes being windows onto the soul, windows which for Buber, even as we look into their blackness, open out to worlds within that are limitless and mysterious and yet recognizable. Where in I-it relations objects are closed and without significant interiority, in I-thou they are open and deep, belying their physical size, like books, like works of art, like living creatures. Let me turn to one of Mendelssohn's last works, the Park Synagogue in Cleveland, Ohio, 1950. There, Mendelssohn managed, although not on a hilltop, to recover some of the thrust of his earlier sketches. The Temple Mount from the south side, and this is the Park Synagogue. It has a base with a prow. It has a figure riding up in the middle, as in the Einstein Tower, a dome, but much larger. The layout of the sanctuary is typical of modern Reform synagogues, i.e. auditorium-like and egalitarian, rather than the facing aisles of the old East European model, with the women upstairs and the bima in the center facing the ark. This building also has a school and a community center. More emotionally moving to me than these large-scale features are its smaller-scale elements. The ark doors and Torah scrolls, the bima, the canopy protecting the ark, the lectern, the eternal flame, the way the wood paneling and the cabinetry is done, down to the door handles and window sills. Yes, the dome is large and impressive, but curtainable, and a continuous band serenely going out to the park beyond. Heating and air conditioning outlets are invisibly incorporated just under the dome, rather than puncture or deface it. There are no downlights in that dome either, and the whole thing glows with warmth. God is in the details, said Michelangelo long before Miss Mandero made it his motto. Here, at the Park Synagogue, that saying is true in an old and new way, starting with the human care it received in design, craftsmanship, and upkeep. The building is loved, but God was also in the absolutely sure hand with which the small elements listed above were invented, drawn, and crafted. Here it is in the small that we see him embrace conventional Jewish symbols like the menorah, the hands of priestly blessing, the crown, the Hebrew letter shin, which is the symbol of fire and transformation. In the small sanctuary nearby, there's the eternal light. In the small sanctuary here we see a return of Mendelssohn's early sketch, Ladders and Angels' Delight, in the energy of curved, hand-drawn lines. It is here in the small that we see him embrace the menorah, the hands of priestly blessing, the crown, the Hebrew letter shin, with ease and kindness. Interestingly, the Star of David is absent except in an early drawing. In the small sanctuary nearby, murals around the ark, which we see here, depict wheat and grapes, fructitude, painted on wood in a style reminiscent of Art Nouveau, and so of Mendelssohn's youth. Back in the main sanctuary, a contrast is dramatized between the featureless, infinite-seeming dome, the light of a sunset sky, and nearby objects to look at in reverie. If you have attended services, you understand boredom. You have experienced the wandering mind. Your siddur is in your hands, but your eyes are seeking a place to alight. Should God not be waiting for you there, too, in a bit of sunlight, a gleam of gold, an intriguing pattern, a deer glimpsed outside? Seeing is touching with one's eyes. Repetition counts the minutes like a clock, around and again, up and then down. Abstract similitude launches the imagination. And so the eyes are led into things, into the space between them and within them, to the space, in a sense, pressed into them by someone's loving intelligence. Thus does Mendelssohn's Park Synagogue reach for sacredness on a Jewish, or should I say, Buberian model. I should like to end this lecture with a return to the question posed at the beginning. Is there such a thing as Jewish space? And if there is, why have I not shown it easily in all the work of Erich Mendelsohn? The answer to the first question is yes, there is such a thing as Jewish space, but it is a much, much more subtle phenomenon than can be elucidated in 3 or 4 paragraphs or even an hour talking about 3 or 4 buildings. I would refer the reader to my 2020 book, Architecture Beyond Experience, to see how a theoretical account of Jewish space might go, although I do not use that term. Buber is a strong influence in Architecture Beyond Experience. I write about architecture in the second person there and of architecture of dialogue, but Mendelssohn is not among my examples. Perhaps he should have been. This is a work by a much later, though their lives overlap, Jewish architect Louis Kahn, very famously at the Salk Institute, facing west, his buildings devoted in a way to waiting for who knows what. But this entire building places infinity at its core. Here, the smaller chapel at the Park Synagogue is at the very front of the building, leading and pointing towards Jerusalem and towards community. I hope that my treatment today of the themes of creation and evolution, of Zion and Acropolis, and of the large and the small have thrown some light on Mendelsohn and Buber. You'll be the judge. For me at least, they provided doorways to a realm of theorizing begun, but not yet fully explored. I thank you for listening, and I thank the organizers.